Mr. Professor Jibra'il Umar, thank you for giving your time to the Afghan Islamic Press, that you give your time to interview our agency. This is a private Kabul-based Afghan agency providing news to the international media outlets. Many aspects of your life are discussed before international media and national media, and you are very active personality on Twitter and social media. People inside Afghanistan and outside Afghanistan, they knew you. You become a famous personality since some years. Therefore, the Afghan Islamic Press want to interview you, ask you some new questions that the people want to know about you, your visit to Afghanistan, and your future plans that you want to help Afghan people or the Afghan children or women, that these people, they were very critical situation, they were facing critical situation. Therefore, your answer will be valuable for us and for Afghan people. As a first question, would you like to tell us something about your purpose of your visit to Afghanistan? What is your purposes and what is your goals that you come here and you are meeting the current government officials?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I came to Afghanistan to complete a journey. I came at the invitation of the IEA, Alhamdulillah. As does everyone who comes here to Afghanistan. I went to the embassy, I applied for the visa, I received the visa, I hopped on a plane and I came here. Since the moment of my release, actually, even whilst I was in captivity, I was already formulating a plan to return to Afghanistan. And that plan was completely independent of whoever was in power at that time. If the former regime had still been in power, I would have still come back to Afghanistan and continue to do the same work that I'm doing now. I spent a lot of time in remote regional areas in Afghanistan. I myself come from a rural area of Australia, a town called Wagga Wagga. These isolated areas in Afghanistan saw basically nothing of the $250 billion that flowed into the country in the form of foreign aid. I saw firsthand the active discrimination against the Pashtun people perpetrated by the puppet regime, occupying forces, warlords, and the ANDSF. I saw the challenging conditions that Afghans faced in these areas. But I also saw something else. A tenacious people proud of their culture and tradition. A warm people who, despite being bombed day after day after day, still kept loyal to their quest for an independent Afghanistan. But in the end, it was the sound of children, something that you hear all over the world. Their sounds brought me back. The sound of them playing and laughing and yelling to each other across a field. I could hear it through my cell, through the walls. A sound that I hear today in Afghanistan.
Does the government of Afghanistan question you when you are coming and you are traveling to Afghanistan?
The government of Australia issues statements through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. These statements are based on information gathered and decisions made by the ministry and contain advice to Australian travellers. At present, they recommend Australians not to travel to Afghanistan. The same advice that was in place 6 years ago when I first came here. I have made known to the Australian government over many separate occasions over the last 2 years that I would return to Afghanistan. The Australian Federal Police and ASIO are also aware of my intentions. As an Australian, I will never put the safety of my country at risk. As a Muslim, I am obligated to fulfill my promise to Allah, and that promise was that if I lived, I would return and do what I could to help the people of Afghanistan. I know Prime Minister Albanese has the compassion in his heart to understand what I am trying to do here, inshallah.
Australia had troops in Afghanistan. These troops were withdrawn and returned home when the international troops leading by US, they were leaving Afghanistan prior to victory of Islamic Emirate in Afghanistan. How do you assess the deployment of Australian forces to Afghanistan?
Is a vital partner and ally of the United States, just as the United States is the most important ally of Australia. Australians have fought alongside America since World War II, World War I, the Vietnam War, the Korean War, and the Iraq War. And this also includes the invasion or occupation of Afghanistan. Australia sent troops to Afghanistan because of their strong allegiance to the USA. I do not want to comment on the decision of the government to send troops because from their point of view, they had no choice once the US announced intentions to invade. However, I would like to comment on a point that is often overlooked. In findings of the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide last year, it was stated that 1,200 Australian defence personnel have committed suicide in the last 2 decades, since they returned from Afghanistan. 38 soldiers were killed in combat. This means that 30 times more soldiers have died at their own hands after returning from Afghanistan. These facts demonstrate that the effects of fighting in Afghanistan have had a huge mental, emotional and a physical effect on Australian Defence Force members. It is also clear that Australian troops saw and participated in many situations which led to the development of chronic and severe post-traumatic stress disorder. Whilst I cannot comment on the deployment of these forces, I can state without doubt that the Australian government has failed these Defence Force members. The ADF and the Veterans Affairs have failed them. If Australia is unable to care for those who fight in these wars, then we shouldn't be sending these soldiers into the field. Without adequate and appropriate support, duty of care is not met.
The Australian troops are accused of violating human rights in Afghanistan. Are you agreed with these allegations or not?
In March 2020, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, our national channel, aired an investigative report titled The Killing Fields. This report alleged that Australian soldiers had committed war crimes in Afghanistan. It showed personal helmet camera footage of these crimes. Alleged crimes include summary execution of minors, throwdowns, which is where Australian soldiers place firearms next to a victim, and blooding, which is a barbaric practice where junior officers were required to kill an Afghan civilian to show their bravery. Many Australians simply believed to refuse that this was true, and these journalists have been attacked, abused and received death threats. The Australian military has a long history of being honourable in its actions in war. In World War I, in Turkey, they fought so bravely that Ataturk built a cemetery and memorial for them. The Australian military is very much a part of our national identity. However, these war crimes, these claims were validated in a Royal Commission called the Brereton Report, which was released in November 2020. The report found evidence that at least 39 civilians were murdered and that this was done by members of the Australian Defence Forces and also covered up by the same personnel. The report stated 25 ADF personnel were involved in the killings, including those who were accessories to the incidents. I believe that this is just the tip of the iceberg. Not only Australian military, it is a fact that occupying military forces committed war crimes during their 20-year occupation. All governments must uphold the law. They are bound by it. They must bring these allegations in front of courts and try those accused. The Morrison government in Australia refused to give this justice to the Afghan people. However, the current Prime Minister is a man of ethics and morals. He knows that these people must face justice. He knows that Afghans must be compensated for these war crimes. Inshallah, he will act with great urgency to address this matter. Until he does, the ADF cannot recover fully from this public shame.